You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on October 8th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. All right, friends. Well, we've got an extra zesty night planned tonight, so buckle up your seatbelts. It's about to get metaphysical. I think many of you know for a few weeks now, we've been talking about what it might mean to process God in fresh ways. We've noticed that when we speak of God, we often speak in two registers, the metaphorical and the metaphysical. Metaphors are things like shepherd, rock, fortress, light, and they let us say the unsayable with a poetic placeholder, right? But tonight, I want to move beneath those images into the grammar of being itself. In other words, what we might actually say about God in light of contemporary science. So I want to speak of God tonight not as an object out there, but as the living movement of reality itself. Science embracing, not science fleeing, where physics and cosmology and biology deepen rather than diminish divine wonder. So we're going to begin with a philosopher named Phil Goff, who tells a story in Galileo's Error. Galileo, in order to build a mathematical science, made a brilliant and costly move. He stripped nature of qualities, things like color and taste, sound, texture, and emotion, and he confined them to the mind. The world itself became quantity, like matter in motion under impersonal laws. And the thing is, it actually worked. We're all beneficiaries of this revolution. Medicine and technology and breathtaking discovery are ours. But the move also cut the world in half. It made the outer world objective and exiled experience to the inner world. And in the story we've inherited, the universe became dead, and consciousness became a strange, private byproduct of matter with no place within it. So process philosophy, which we've been exploring in the form of process theology the last couple of weeks, is this great reimagining of a Harvard professor, philosopher, and mathematician named Alfred North Whitehead. And he seeks to heal that split. Process philosophy says Galileo wasn't wrong about mathematics, it's just not the whole story. So at the deepest level, reality isn't made of dead stuff, but of events of experience, tiny acts of feeling that Whitehead called actual occasions. Actual occasions are not things, they're happenings. Think about what it's like if you go to an event, right? Actual occasions don't merely occur in time, they create time. Each arises by prehending or feeling what has come before, then offering itself to what will come next. There's a theoretical physicist by the name of Carlo Rovelli who has said that everything that exists is never stable and is nothing but a jump from one interaction to another. And quantum mechanics and experiments with particles have taught us that the world is a continuous, restless swarming, a world of happenings, not of things. So where materialism pictures particles colliding, process thought pictures moments of relationship, each inheriting the whole past of the universe, transforming it and contributing something new. So rather than a world of matter, we inhabit a world of feeling. Reality is relational all the way down, so every atom, every cell, every star and heartbeat is a pulse of experience bound by threads of influence and memory and creativity. So there's one important clarification I want to make here. Process thought does not deny the material world. It relocates it. Material actuality is real, but it's the stabilized outcome of ongoing experiential events. So what we call matter is a pattern of achieved relations, the visible crust of a deeper living ontology. We don't lose the physical, we place it inside a more basic field of becoming. So in the classical materialist picture of the universe, the world is made of substances, persistent things that interact externally, like a billiard cue hits a billiard ball. Cause is something that's outside one thing and pushing another in a direction. But in the process picture, which is consonant with prevailing quantum mechanics, the world is made of events, and events are inherently relational. An actual occasion doesn't bump into the past, it feels the past. It receives the world into itself like a note resonating with all prior harmonies. It has an inside, subjective immediacy, and an outside, which is the causal efficacy it has in the world. So Ravelli notes again that it isn't things that enter into relations, but rather relations that ground the notion of a thing. The world of quantum mechanics is not a world of objects, but a world of events, he says. So, a physical particle, i.e. in materialism, is an object with no subjectivity. But an event or an actual occasion, which mean the same thing in process thought, is a subject that also becomes an object for others. And this shift changes everything. Because in a world of substances, isolation is actually possible. We all know how the myth of separation is working in our society. But in a world of events, nothing is actually isolated. Every moment is relational in the sense that it's becoming with every other. So again, on this, Ravelli notes, if we look at a stone, it stays still. But if we could see its atoms, we would observe them to be always now here and now there in ceaseless vibration. Quantum mechanics reveals to us that the more we look at the detail of the world, the less constant it is. The world isn't made up of tiny pebbles. It's a world of vibrations, a continuous fluctuation, and a microscopic swarming of fleeting micro events. So, you might be wondering at this point, does this mean a rock feels the same way that we do? Well, no. Whitehead insists on a spectrum of intensity. Every entity from quarks at the subatomic level to quasars at the macro level has some sense of inwardness, but the richness varies. So a rock, for instance, is mostly repetitive, right? Its inner life is dull, dim, and stable. But a living cell or tree, an octopus, or a human mind is a dynamic society of occasions capable of more integrated and self-aware forms of experience. So, instead of a hard line between conscious and not conscious, process thought envisions a gradient, the same kind of reality present throughout, differing by degree, but not by kind. This is often called panexperientialism or panpsychism, which means not everything is conscious like us, but everything in the entire cosmos somehow participates in experience. So one quick but crucial distinction here. In process thought, consciousness, which gets thrown around a lot in contemplative circles, right? Some people will say consciousness is everywhere. Consciousness is not a general field that we float in. It's a highly integrated form of experience that emerges when many occasions unify, for example, in brains and in living systems. Yet every becoming exhibits three powers: the inheritance of the past, valued possibilities for the future, and agency to make decision in the present moment. So every event, not just human consciousness, involves some degree of feeling and decision. Our consciousness is a higher order expression of this cosmic pattern and a later intensification on the same experiential spectrum made possible by the structural openness of the cosmos itself, right? And so Whitehead says, in this, the many become one and are increased by one. So each moment in the universe feels the world, unifies it into itself, and offers it back as a fresh creative contribution. So here is where this metaphysics becomes theology. When reality is seen as a web of events, each feeling and offering itself to the next, it's impossible not to wonder, what is the life of the web itself? The pattern of relation, the pulse of connection that holds and harmonizes all becomings. That's what process thinkers call God. So in the classical theological tradition, God is perfect because God doesn't change. God is eternal or impassible, meaning untouched by the world. So what thinkers like Anselm and Aquinas called the unmoved mover meant that God couldn't be affected, because if God could be affected, God could suffer. And if God suffered, God would be imperfect. So God was placed outside time, outside becoming, and safe essentially from us and our pain. Most of our tradition has thought of God in terms based on what we sometimes call biblical revelation, as a grounds to say what God is like. So the problem with this is who gets to interpret the Bible, right? And through what lens are they dictating what God is like? In weeks past, we've already talked about how God is seen when Caesar's editors get a hold of the Bible, right? But nowadays, some of us would like God to be at least resonant with our most current scientific wisdom and understanding. So it needs to be said that in the process vision, God is not an exception to the laws of nature, but their chief exemplification. God is the one in whom the creative process is gathered, renewed, and lured toward beauty. So Whitehead calls the God that emerges from this metaphysical system a dipolar God, meaning with two aspects or two sides to God's self. One side is called the primordial nature, the reservoir of eternal possibilities, the lure toward harmony and novelty in the world. But the other side, the consequent nature, is the receptive heart of the world, taking in every actual experience in its aesthetic satisfaction, feeling it fully, and weaving it toward deeper wholeness and a deeper intensity of beauty. So God is actually called by Whitehead the harmony of harmonies, this living relational field that feels every joy and every sorrow. And as my favorite process theologian, Catherine Keller, has put it, God is not the unmoved mover, but the most moved mover. God is the compassionate one, the fellow sufferer who understands. So, when we say something like God is love, process thought invites us to hear this not only as mere poetry, but also as metaphysics. Love is what happens when relational energy flows freely, when beings open to one another and respond creatively. That's what the universe is doing, from atoms to galaxies. It's an expression of relationality becoming one and increasing by one, which is a creative act of love. God is that inward, non-coercive lure toward harmony, beauty, and justice, the call in every moment to become more connected, more alive, and more compassionate as we feel the feelings of other things. So in this vision, the cosmos itself is actually collaborative. God and the world aren't rivals, they co-create. We might say God is the lure toward order and beauty, and the world is the response, embodying that lure in concrete decisions, and together they form a circle of creation, each moment received, felt, transformed in divine love. Philosopher Roland Faber calls this the divine manifold. That's the big picture. God not as an external ruler, but as the loving and just interrelationality of all cosmic relations. Every act of love, every birth, every song, every atomic vibration happens as a divine event, part of the world's becoming and God's becoming with it. This also helps us to hear when mystics say something like the world is God's body, right? In a new sense. In a process sense, this can be literally metaphysically true. If God is the relational life that holds and feels all things, then the cosmos is in some sense God's embodiment, a living field of divine experience, and the world isn't outside of God. It is the ongoing expression of God's relational life, which is why other mystics like Catherine of Genoa can say things like, my deepest me is God. She used to run through the street saying, my deepest me is God. So, if reality is relational all the way down, science and spirituality need not be at war with one another. Quantum physics, biology, and cosmology reveal to us a universe of entanglement and field and flow and emergence and mutual becoming. Process theology says the same thing, adding that every law, every particle, and every neuron belongs to a deeper harmony of feeling ordered toward the production of beauty. A more poetic way to say it is, what if the cosmic story isn't matter obeying machinery, but experience deepening, complexity growing, and love awakening? Even evolution becomes God's creative lure through time, calling forth greater beauty and consciousness and freedom through the structural openness that emerges within the cosmological constants that make up our universe. So, if we're to set these side by side, classical theology says that God is unchangeable and timeless and untouched or unaffected, the immovable mover. Perfection then becomes distance, and power becomes a form of control. But for process theology, on the other side, God is with the world, feeling the world, the most moved mover. Perfection becomes participation and presence, and power is non-coercive persuasion or lure, the quiet, unrelenting call toward harmony. So, what if the universe isn't a machine, but a living organism? What if consciousness is not a late intruder, but woven into the texture of emerging complex experience? What if love isn't a moral add-on, but the metaphysical core of reality? And what if God isn't somewhere out there or elsewhere, but the name for the interrelational pulse of the whole expanding universe, the divine becoming in which we live and move and have our being? Friends, tonight we've moved into the deep a little bit, right? The metaphysical waters of what we mean when we say God beyond just a metaphor. I would also propose that perhaps our metaphors make the most sense in a relational universe like the ones we've talked about tonight. So even here, we're still in that same current of theopoetics. Every breath, every heartbeat, every conversation is an actual occasion of complex experience, a felt moment in which the many become one and are increased creatively by one. Each of us participates in the world's becoming, and each of us, in our small and beautiful ways, participates in God's experience. If the world is alive in this way of having experience and aesthetic satisfaction, then the call of spirituality is not to escape it, but to join it. To join the dance of reciprocity and compassion, this divine cycle of love, giving and receiving itself, which becomes this infinite loop of compassion. So we made it, y'all. We did it. I know it's not what we're talking about every week, and I know not everything from this talk is going to stick, but I thought it would be fun at least once to give a speculative account of God. And perhaps we can see that in this speculative vision of the cosmos, the universe isn't merely a place we live in, but it's also an expression of a living God we live through, which is in us, through us, and all around us. All right, I'm looking forward to talking about this with you all tonight. So I've got 3 contemplative questions for conversation around your tables. The first question is the self question. If your identity is not a fixed thing, but a flow of experiences, a series of actual occasions, what feels alive and in process within you right now? Where do you sense yourself changing, growing, or becoming, even in subtle ways? Number 2, the sacred question. If God is the harmony humming through every relation, the feeling of the world feeling itself, when was the last time you sensed that hum? Or how would it change your perspective to consider God as loving aspects of our cosmic life? And lastly, the society question. If the universe itself is collaborative, a web of becoming, how might that change how we live together societally? How could we reorient our politics, our communities, or our sense of justice if we trusted that love really is the structure of reality? Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.